Okay.
Here we go. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Brian Getz, Water Resources Director, Deputy Director of Public Works, City of Portsmouth, here tonight for March 7th, Safe Water Advisory Group. And turn over to Andrea to go around the room.
Hey, everybody. Andrea Amico, co-chair of the SWAG with Brian. Thanks for joining our first meeting of 2023. We have an agenda put together that we sent out to all of you, and we have some guests from Dover here tonight who are going to present to us. So we're appreciative of making the trip and looking forward to hearing what they have to share with us. I think the first thing we'll do is probably introductions, just so everybody knows who everyone is. Again, Andrea Amico, Portsmouth resident and co-chair of the SWAG with Brian, and I'll pass it this way.
Hi, Bill McQuillan. I'm the fire chief, member of the SWAG and city resident.
Katrin Hillman, I'm a city resident. I've been on the SWAG since it started.
Dave Buse, the state representative.
Christine Minger with Redantis, a consultant to the Dover Group.
Gretchen Young, I'm the environmental projects manager for the city of Dover.
Dean Pichot, consultant, project manager for the Dover Landfill Group.
Water resource manager for the city.
I'm Vince Lombardi, I'm the city councilor.
Richard Blaylock, I'm also a city councilor.
I'm John Storr, I'm the director of community services for the city of Dover. Thank you for having us.
I'm Mason, I'm the water quality analyst for the city of Portsmouth.
Okay. We have two attendees, but they're not SWAG members, so we will. Oh, there we go. I think just in time is Laurel. So let me promote her to panelists, and then she can introduce herself. So it's good timing. Are you there, Laurel?
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening. It's good to have someone that can give us a little feedback if what you're seeing on the screen. It's always a challenge here to know exactly what we're going to get ready to share screen. I'll pull up the agenda. So Laurel, good to have you here, and you just came in right as everybody else got introduced. So good timing. Let me share the screen of our agenda for Andrea. What's always a struggle. There we go.
Okay, so this is what we plan to cover tonight. We're quickly going to go over the survey results that all of you filled out for us. Thank you for that. Brian's going to give us a brief year in review of 2022. And then we'll pass it over to Representative Buse, who will give us some updates on legislation in New Hampshire. And then we will hear from our guests from Dover on the toll and landfill, have Q&A at the end, and then open it up for public comment. Before we get started, the one order of business we need to do is approve our minutes from the December meeting. So if we could have a motion to do that.
I'll move that we accept the December SWAG minutes.
Second.
And is everybody in favor of approving those minutes?
Yes.
Good. I think we're all in agreement. Okay. Next slide, please.
Real quick, let me ask Laurel if she is seeing slides change. Laurel, are you seeing the slides change on your end?
Yeah, I'm seeing the slides change. It's not in presentation mode, so I see the small versions of the slides on the left. But yeah, I'm seeing the slides.
Okay, I think it's a matter of the system, but look, we're almost full screen here, so that's kind of good. So, okay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. All right, and then just briefly, I wanted to update all of you on the survey that we did send out. 10 of you completed it. Thank you so much. And really the goal was just to make sure we're scheduling the meetings at dates and times that work for most people. You know, we all have various commitments and that's hard to do sometimes. Tuesdays and Wednesdays were the best days to meet. So we will try our best to schedule meetings on those nights. And 6:30 to 8:30 was the best meeting time for the majority of the group. So we will try to work within that time frame as well. And then really, we just wanted to get feedback from all of you on future topics and what the SWAG should be focusing on in our meetings. And this was the votes that we had received. So 7 votes for other sources of PFAS in the city that could impact water supply. There was also 7 votes for public outreach around watershed and drinking water sources. and also legislative updates. And then for 4 votes, we had how city emergencies impact water supply and Coakley landfills impact to drinking water. 3 votes Legionnaires, 1 vote overall water system supply infrastructure, wastewater, CCM 137, and then lead and its impacting children. So again, thank you for everybody who filled out the survey. It's really helpful for Brian and I as we plan our meetings and make sure we're covering topics that are pertinent to all of you and the community and the different perspectives that you bring. And if there's any concerns that come up, please just let us know, because we want to make sure we're addressing concerns that are relevant to our community. And so that was it. And we'll just move on to our
Okay,
next updates.
and I think a good basis for what we'll probably try to narrow down for the next meeting. So first up, very quickly, year in review. As you know, one of the initiatives of this group was to do quarterly updates, which is what we've been doing. We actually took what was a monthly update and turned it into a quarterly, and then the year in review, which we did last year. So I'll zip through our look at last year for the Safe Water Advisory Group. First up, precipitation. This time last year, we were looking at pretty dry conditions again, and we saw that pretty much, though we did have pretty good February and pretty good April. So if you see the screen here, the light blue is average and the dark blue is the amount of precipitation we got. So we were less than average all the way through until July. We finally got some pretty good rains. August was a kind of average, September wet, October wet, and then November and December combined pretty wet. So the end of the year, the second half of the year was really good for recovery. We continue to be on that path. We were kind of in a wet pattern. February was dry, but January was wet, and we're back to wet again right now. And this is pretty much where we stood with the drought monitor as of October. We were recovering. And then, of course, right now, this is fairly current. There is no drought to speak of in the entire state at the moment. That's been the first time in a long time that we've seen a map like that. Overall weather of Boston Globe. So Stephanie Secord's not with us tonight, but she likes to provide this summary. She does a little snapshot of this every year, and I've never run across one for our region, specifically Portsmouth, but this Boston Globe one's very interesting. It's more of a broad look of temperatures, and again, above normal temperatures. It's been trending that way for a while. They do have 150 years of record, and July was the 3rd warmest, August the 3rd warmest, and November warm as well. So I think we all experienced that up here as well. If there's one graph that helps Al and I talk about water supply, it's this one. So this is the Bellamy Reservoir, and we had kind of the drought of record in 2016, followed by kind of some average weather for the next few years, nothing extreme. And then we moved right into the 2020 drought, which was right behind the 2016. Recoveries both times were quite quick. It takes about a 4-inch rain combined to see the recovery in the reservoir. And as you can see from the dots, it takes a while for that drawdown and for the drought to actually begin. But getting out of the drought ended quickly. I think I've said before this group too that the drought is one emergency that we can sort of predict, or you can see coming, because it's slow coming. And hats off to Al and staff for dealing with that. And as you saw from the precipitation, we were heading that way this year again too. And then July came and it got wet, and right now our conditions are looking good. We see the same thing in our groundwater table. So we had drought conditions back in, sorry about the not being able to see the bottom there, but this is right around 2014, 2015. So this is a drought, and this is showing low groundwater levels. We had recovery, and right now we're in really good conditions. And some of that too, I've talked about our strategy of using surface water when it's there. We save the groundwater for the dry times and for peak usage. This is the overall water supply. Al does this graphic, which is really good, indicative of where the water comes from. So the dark blue is the amount of surface water in million gallons. So the Bellamy Reservoir, we took 833 million gallons out of the Bellamy. The light green is the amount of million gallons out of our groundwater sources for Portsmouth. And then the Pease groundwater sources. And we've got a little more info on Pease right here. And this is the breakdown of all the sources of supply. One thing that joined the club, so to speak, for our supplies was the introduction of Madbury Well 5. That's our, though it's the fifth well of Madbury, but well 1 does not exist anymore. So we have 2 through 5. And you can see combined how much those wells do. Madbury Well 5 is pumping very nicely. The Greenland well is a good producer groundwater wise, and then Portsmouth and Collins. But as you can see, the bulk of the Portsmouth supply comes from the surface water from the Bellamy. And then over here for the Portsmouth, the Pease source, Smith Harrison, and with the Haven well back online. This used to be the Portsmouth water that we had to supplement Pease when the Haven was offline, but now with treatment, we've been able to bring that back into service, and that's been a good source. And the good news there is, you know, less water, less stress on the Portsmouth system because of that. Here's our water sales. We're trending. I know there's a lot of discussion about all the development in the city and where's all the water coming from. Well, there is quite a bit of redevelopment. It seems to be fairly efficient when it comes to water usage, and we see efficiency through this trend. And you know, so we're not seeing a big bell curve or a big curve up of water demand on our customer side. Attributed this a little bit to success or a rebate program. We're at about over 1,500 now. This was as of fiscal year end 22, which was June 30th of last year. So we continue this now. We're well over 1,500 rebates for the low flow toilets and the washing machines. And with that, I've started to calculate, you know, what are the savings of that? So, you know, just some rough estimates. If people had a 3.5 gallon toilet, replaced it with a 1.28, you know, and it's a family of 4 flushing 4 times a day each, you know, these could go up and down, bigger family, smaller family, more flushes, less flushes. But, you know, just using that standard, and then 1 load of laundry a day, an inefficient top loading washing machine uses 40 gallons. It was surprising to me to find out how much water one of those machines can use when you, you know, fill up all the way. High efficiency washer is 13 gallons per load. So we're estimating a savings of about 50,000 gallons, which is reducing our water demand by 1.4%. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't seem like much, but if we were to need that much more source, and it was a groundwater source, that's a permit. Anything over 42,000 gallons a day would require a state permit for. And then our water balance. So the blue is the amount of water we pump in the system. The green is the amount that we sell. The orange is that differential. And you can see how we're closing that gap. And this is through our leak detection, through our meter program, and you know, tracking down water loss. So we're about as low as we've been. We're sitting right around 4%. So when we add all those numbers up, that differential is about 4%. Anytime you get below 5, it's very good. Per the state, we're supposed to be below 15. 10% is like the industry standard. So the fact that we're doing this well, and a big credit to staff out there that really worked hard on leak detection. And then Al, so this is our Bellamy Reservoir. I know Dover is here to talk about the Tolan in the reservoir. A big effort that we've been making, also in concert with Dover. They have some sources in Dover, actually in 2018, acquired some land adjacent to the reservoir that's now protected. Al got the two acquisitions in 2018 and 2020. And we're currently working on one down here that has gone through council, and Al, we're at the point of, hopefully closing out soon.
Closing the deal, yeah. We did get approval from the state for funding for that too. So.
And then just summing out up all those properties there. The Collins Wells moving forward, we did pump testing. You can see the existing Collins Well is here, the new Collins Well. So similar to the Madbury wells, 2 through 5. This will be now Collins Well 1, and this, I know this graphic says Collins Well B, and what do we call it? Well, it's Collins Well 2. So that has been pump testing. We've submitted the report, I think. Well, now you give us an update.
Yeah, we're still waiting for the final report from Emory and Garrett. We did the public test in October and everything looked good from that. All the water quality data came back. So that just needs to go through the state to get our permit. We're hoping to get that by the summertime so we could use this well as a backup well in case something went wrong.
Our Little Bay water transmission main. So we are currently working with the town of Durham for access through Wagon Hill. So this is the water main that runs all the way down. If you're familiar with Emory Farm and Wagon Hill Farm over in Durham, our water main goes into Wagon Hill, it splits down and goes under Little Bay and then back up at Fox Point. And so we're in the process of finalizing permitting and land agreements to get down to the waterfront. We do have a pretty good easement, but it's really just to get the additional area needed to do actually the construction. And then Dover. So been working with John Storer on this project and the bridge project. So there was an article in the paper today about the state trying to get some federal funds for the bridge project. If they get the federal funds, we already have some federal funds. $3.5 million has been earmarked through Senator Shaheen to put a pipe on the bridge, and then on either side there'll be work on either side. The project is overall a $7.2 million project, so 3.5 is half of that money, and then we'll see what we do to acquire additional monies. We're going to keep our efforts to work with the state, but ultimately it would link all the systems up here to the systems down here, which gets us all the way down to Seabrook. From Rochester all the way down to Seabrook, and this is the last link. All the other systems are interconnected in one way or another, or the pipes are just right next to each other. So that would close the loop, so to speak. As I mentioned, the Madbury well upgrades. So well 4 is back online, and water quality. Mason Caceres is with us. Mason's our water quality specialist in charge of the lab and sampling, and you might see him out and about doing sampling on Tuesday. I saw you turn the corner on the Junkins today, but you didn't wave because I noticed you too late, Mason. But the yellow band, the yellow water quality band. So with that, actually, Mason's here tonight to become. He's going to sit in Al's seat moving forward. So you may know that. We also have the Restoration Advisory Board, which Andrew is part of and co-chair of that one too. So Al is going to take my seat as a representative of the Restoration Advisory Board. Tim Green, who's our chief plant operator out at Pease, is going to be the number 2 there. So Mason's going to step up and he'll be part of the Safe Water Advisory Group with me moving forward. Not an official member, but sort of, technical support in that. So with that, he's here tonight. So our performance on the PFAS treatment, this is a good news story right now with the removal of, the filters that are online. We're well over 360 million gallons treated through our site on Grafton Drive. I know some of you came to a meeting we had where we took a walk around. Tomorrow we actually have New England Waterworks is doing a PFAS seminar that's going to be at DES over at Pease, and then at the end of the day, everybody's going to come and tour this facility. So there'll be a lot of people interested. Al and Tim will be taking them through, but these are the resin filters here and the carbon filters behind, and then the sampling that we've been doing monthly for quite some time now. We are getting ready to change out a couple of these filters, the media, to get them in a cycle of so they all don't go at once. So that I know on the agenda we are talking about when the PFAS regs may come out, the recommended EPA MCLs, but these are the latest running average. So in New Hampshire, we have these 4 compounds that are regulated. We're supposed to do the 4-quarter running average of them, and this is where we're at right now. The Portsmouth well being kind of the highest concentrated one on the edge of the Pease aquifer. We are working with a consultant to look at what type of treatment system would possibly have to go on there should the regulations dictate that. So we are working on that. Similarly, we have in the CIP treatment for the Greenland well. So I think the council has approved that, and we're in design of that as well, or preliminary design. So lastly, every year the DES does stop by and they do a full tour of all our facilities. They meet with Al, they meet with me, meet with other staff. We actually just got this report in today, so I was able to do a final edit to the presentation. And they said a couple nice things to us, which is really a credit to Al and his staff. They especially liked our proactive aspects of operations that have water conservation, communication, and succession plan for staffing. So succession right here with Mason, and no promises the long-term Mason, but there you go. We gotta get him in the loop. That's how it works, So anyway, and we do have some other great new staff. We did unfortunately for John's sake. We just started today. One of Dover's former employees came to work for us. So that's not really the way we wanted to pan out. I mean, I'm sure it happens with the fire department, it happens with police departments, it happens in consulting. But it's really tough. It's really hard to get good employees. We've really been on the wastewater side as well, or just overall technical staff. So we're doing our best there to staff up. So with that, I guess if any questions in particular to that update, or we could move on to our legislative update. Okay, thank you. So now, David, I did try my best to take your PD out, but yeah, a little.
I think what I'll do, to make a long story short, we're very early in legislative process right now. Only a couple of the bills involving water and environment have even been acted yet on in committee. So there's a lot of action that's going to happen over the next few weeks. But for now, it's a win just to know how many bills are out there and what they are, which we really weren't able to do until about a month ago. Just to give you an idea, there are over 1,000 bills filed just in the House in this particular legislative session. So trying to track all of them is quite a task. One of the things that I think is sort of a theme with some of the bills that we're seeing this year is the siting of landfills is a big issue, and that's because of what's been going on up north in Dalton, where Casella has been trying to build a new landfill relatively close to a state park up there. People in the community have objected to it. Other people in the community have told those other people to get out of the way and let the Casella people build it. And so there's been a big fight around the whole issue of landfill siting, how involved the Department of Environmental Services should be, how involved the legislature should be. So what we have is a combination of bills where the legislature is trying to be, in some of them, very prescriptive around what can and cannot be done. And then there's another group of bills that essentially would allow DES to write the rules themselves. So the bill that caused the big controversy last year that wound up dying over in the Senate, I think it died over in the Senate, but no, it's actually vetoed by the governor. That particular bill is back. It's HB 56, and that's making its way through. One that should be on your radar, although not a huge impact in Portsmouth because we don't have a ton of private wells, is we do have a private well testing bill that I'm actually the prime sponsor of. It was sort of one of the fruits of our labor in the Seacoast Long-Term Drinking Water Commission that several of us are on. The reason for that is that DES gave us an update on PFAS contamination in New Hampshire in private wells, and over a third of the private wells that they've done testing on test above the MCL levels, and almost 2/3, I think almost 3/4 of them, of the ones that were tested, are testing positive for some level of PFAS. Most of these wells are in the southern part of the state, where we have the biggest part of the problem. But one of the things that it really did was it sort of opened a lot of people's eyes to the extent of the PFAS problem out there. Where I think we tend to think it's just Merrimack around the St. Clement plant or Coakley landfill and places around that. And that really isn't the case. There are lots of different ways that PFAS is entering the environment, and it is finding its way into private wells. So HB 205 would require testing for the 4 regulated PFAS chemicals. It would also require testing, I think, for over a dozen others, including radon and arsenic, and it would require testing when new wells are actually drilled. So the well installer would actually have to run the testing for you. There's some debate in committee about whether or not to take the PFAS part of it out, which would kind of break my heart. But if that's what we need to get testing done for the other chemicals, it's better to have 3/4 of the bill go through than have nothing go through, because we can always amend it and try again next year. Another bill that will sound familiar to some of you is a bill that would establish a blood level testing requirement for children who are entering preschool, kindergarten. We got that through the House last year. It didn't quite make it through the Senate. There have been some changes to it, so fingers crossed we're going to get that through this year. There were also some appropriation bills, and one of the ones I wanted to call your attention to is one that's actually already passed. HB 534 is actually in the hands of the Finance Committee now, and what that would do is create a water assistance fund that can be used to repair and replace drinking water treatment sources that are actually damaged in catastrophic events, big weather events, things like that. So it would actually provide money for things of that nature. Probably, overall, not quite as much legislation around the PFAS issue itself. There are some bills that are kind of floating through the Commerce Committee now that would ban the use of food packaging containing PFAS materials. There's another bill in Health and Human Services that would require insurers to cover what they call preventive PFAS care. So that would be the kind of care that if you, for instance, the situation I know, Andrew, that you and a lot of the folks in Pease are in is, you have elevated levels of PFAS, And the question is well, now what? What kind of preventive care should I be getting? Who should be paying for it? So the objective of that bill is to clarify that that is something that should be covered in your insurance in the state of New Hampshire. So that's another one that's kind of basically making its way through the process. And if you have a copy of the presentation, you have a list of the bills. And what I'll do is we have our meetings is I'll provide updates on the status of them. And if you have any questions about where things are at, just give me a call. It's very easy for me to look. I mean, I don't always know the answer off the top of my head, but I know where to look it up and who to ask.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. This slide is blank. The EPA, as you all know, we had a presentation, I think it was last summer, with Dr. John Fatale from New Hampshire DES, who walked us through how the EPA released some health advisories on for PFAS, and that we should be expecting MCL levels to be released. Initially, it was supposed to be fall of 2022. And it's now March of 2023, and we still have not received any updates from the EPA. They have not officially announced their MCLs yet. So we will keep you all posted. I think we put that they're hoping maybe we'd hear something, but nothing yet. So I think a lot of folks are anxious to know what those numbers are, and it's important to know that even when they release the levels for the MCLs, there's still a long process for that to get approved. There'll be public comment periods and all of that, and it's my understanding it will take like a year, I think, or longer. So
At least.
yeah, so it's not like once they release the levels, it's automatic, but I think it will.
So
Everybody will know, it'll give us some idea of what to expect.
So we are, been working with Al on this, and I'll be out next week. If they announce it next week, Al gets to be the spokesperson, but hopefully it's not a going away thing for me. But we've talked to the state about this. It would be pending regulations. So for now, New Hampshire's are the markers for us, so we wouldn't immediately have to shut down sources or anything like that, because we follow New Hampshire's MCLs, which we believe were very thoroughly, put together and analyzed and set. But we'll see what the EPA comes up with. And again, like Andrew said, it's a fairly long process that they'll be going through. And I think as we know, as David said, I mean, this stuff is ubiquitous. I came across most recently, of course, yeah, the Waterkeeper Alliance did a survey of surface waters and found it everywhere in every state, and some fairly high concentrations around. So I think there's still this assessment of places that have never even sampled yet throughout the country. So we'll see where it goes. All right.
All right, so with that, I think we'll turn it over to our guest from Dover to give us a presentation on the toll and landfill, and I think Brian has some slides of theirs to pull up.
Yes. We'll let them, Gretchen and company, you can reintroduce yourself. Let me just.
Sure, yeah, I will take a second. So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to come speak with you. Again, I'm Gretchen Young. So I am the environmental project manager for the city of Dover. I've been with the city for about 9 years now. But I have been in this role for almost 3 years. So I'm one of the really new people on this project. There's a long history with it. Dean Pichelle, you'll see in the slides that there's actually a Dover landfill group. So Dover is one of a host of groups, or a host of members of this group. And Dean Pichelle is the project manager for the group as a whole. He has a long history with the project. He was with the city of Dover for many years, and has been part of the landfill project basically since the beginning. So he's got a lot of history. Also with me is Christine Binger from Verdantis. She's the consultant for the Dover Landfill Group. And she's got a long history with the project. So we're really fortunate to have some continuity with these two folks. And then behind me is John Storer, who is our Community Services Director. And so I think between the four of us, hopefully we can answer all of your questions. I'm going to give you the overview and then maybe kind of pull other folks into answer either technical questions or history questions. So with that, I'm going to get going. Also wanted to say, we'd like to give periodic updates. We recently had a 5-year review of the landfill from EPA. And so that sort of spurred the hope to give a 5-year, or excuse me, to give an update. So we recently went to Dover City Council, gave a very similar presentation to them to sort of update them on the status of the project. And so, we really appreciate the opportunity to be here as well. All right, go ahead, Brian. Next slide. All right, so giving everyone a sense of where this site is. So you can see kind of in the middle of the screen is the Bellamy Reservoir. And then that's, yep, exactly. Thank you. Thank you. I know, I told Brian I might get up and start moving around, but so there's the Bellamy Reservoir. To the north of that is where that former municipal landfill site is. And then you can see there's the Cocheco River that comes meandering down right through there. Yep. And then actually just to the north, you can see a large wetland area. Yep, right up there, the Hoppers. Dover has two of our main wells right up in that area. It's all pretty wet through there. And Christine can give you some more information about the sort of geological reasons why that is, but there's a lot of clay through that whole area. And that's why when the Bellamy Reservoir was dammed, why it is filling in and holding water. So again, the landfill is just kind of to the north of that. All right, next slide. So the landfill has the way that the hydrology works through there, because there's the Cocheco River to one side and the Bellamy River, now the reservoir, to the other. The way that hydraulics work is it comes down and goes through the main landfill area, which is in blue, and then sort of divides. So it goes to the eastern plume, which goes to the Cocheco River, which is not a drinking water source. It's more, it's got a history of industrial use along there. And then to the southern plume, what we call it the southern plume area, which does drain down towards the Bellamy Reservoir. And then you can see there's a little purple circle. And I point that out because there is some talk of the Northwest landfill area. And on the plan below it, you can see it says Northwest landfill area. It sort of looks larger, but that purple circle is really the only area that we're talking about. Yep. Next slide. So that is the watershed of the Bellamy Reservoir. So you can see the landfill site. Actually, if you look close, the landfill site doesn't even fall into this outline. It's right up in that tip. The watershed is pretty large for the Bellamy Reservoir. And this plan is actually taken because just to the south of the reservoir is where Dover has an artificial recharge intake. Right there, that's one of our, we have a number of wells in that area, and that's an artificial recharge. So we put this together when we were looking at the watershed of that. And so it just kind of shows, I guess, one, just how large the contributing area is, and two, Dover is also concerned about, what's going into that watershed, because that's a drinking water source for us. So, right, next slide. So I mentioned that it's the Dover Landfill Group. There are the potential responsible parties. And so Dover is about 42%, or almost 43%. One other contributor, Textron, is another large amount, and then the remaining 20% is a mix of other contributors. So that's how that breaks up. Next. So I'm going to talk a bit about the history. So the landfill operated from 1960 to 1979. It's about 47 acres. It is not, some landfills, they found areas where the earth was kind of carved down either naturally or quarry or for whatever reason. That's not how this landfill is set up. So it's really kind of broad. It's as 8 to 12 feet thick, so it's not really thick. It sits on a layer of sand. Then there's something called an interbedded, which is, sand mixing. It becomes a little bit thicker, and then that marine clay that's below it. So it's a pretty large area, but not all that thick. Right, next slide. Just taking you through some of the contamination history. So in 1977, that's when the state first put in a monitoring well and found that there were some volatile organic compounds and arsenic present in that groundwater. So by 79, the landfill was then closed, taken out of operation. And by 1983, it was included on the national priority list. So it was not a Superfund site yet, but it was on its way. All right, next slide. 1984 through 1991. I'm not going to get into all of these studies that went in, but there was a fair amount of investigation that was done at the site during that time. When the EPA did eventually issue their record of decision, that's when it became a Superfund site. So it was being controlled primarily by the federal government. And that's when the Dover Landfill Group started doing institutional controls, which meant there was, prohibiting access to the site. There was some of the wells that were right around the area were taken out, and municipal water was brought through that area. And then we started the groundwater monitoring program. Right, next slide. Again, just kind of going through the history here. The EPA in the 90s, in the early 90s, initially recommended that this would be a traditional cap landfill. That kind of spurred on some additional characterization of the soils, of how the site was working, some more investigation into the groundwater, and how it was moving through the site. And then next slide. Also in 1993, we started a very robust monitoring program, and that's still in place now. So there's been quite a bit of some changes to the monitoring as it goes through, but it's been ongoing monitoring since then, and that continues now. Next slide. I apologize for all the text here, but 96, we submitted 100% remedial design. That was 96, so things have changed since then, but really proposing to do a capture and in situ bioremediation approach rather than doing that traditional capping approach. EPA did some review. There were some more testing, more pilot programs. 2004, they issued their amended record of decision. And that's when we moved away from the cap design. And I mentioned that it actually comes up a bit more in Dover, but there's a fair amount of interest in reusing that site. Right now, it's just an open site. There was hope to do maybe some solar panels, some other type of reuse. And we have no reason to believe that we're going back to a capped type site, but because it was originally an idea of capping it, the EPA has not been comfortable with allowing really any reuse on that area yet. Then in 2006, so there was a trench put in at this time. They were collecting some runoff. In 2006 and 2007, they did a southern plume pre-design investigation. The southern plume is what you all are most interested in. That's what's heading towards the Bellamy. The southern plume groundwater extraction operation went in 2007 through 2011. That was about a 4-inch well that went in and was pumping from the center of mass, pulling a lot of the groundwater, the contaminated groundwater out. And again, at this time, we're kind of looking at those more traditional VOCs. And then there was some additional analysis of the groundwater that was heading towards the Cocheco. All right, next slide. So I did talk about the first pumping. So there was a well that was put in that southern plume. It was put in where the center of the mass was for those traditional VOCs. You'll see there's kind of a line of monitoring wells. You can kind of see there's two. So there's where the Bellamy River is, or Bellamy Reservoir. Then there's one low line down there, and then the one above it. So that's where the kind of the edge of the plume was, as we understood when we were doing those traditional VOCs. Down closer to the Bellamy, there's some older ones. Some of those two blue ones are from the 90s, and there were no VOCs detected, and still have not been any in those lower monitored wells. All right, next slide. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about that northwest landfill area because you'll see it comes up in the 5-year review comments. So that's that little pocket in the northwest, and it was a hot spot. You can go to the next slide. So there was a process of determining where that hotspot was, but once they found it, they did a pretty full scale air sparge vapor extraction. They were able to remove over 43,000 pounds of VOCs. Really did a lot. They operated that for 3 years, and in the end, they really felt, and the EPA also found that it had met their goals. So that hotspot, a lot of that had been pulled out. A lot of the VOCs. All right, next slide. So 2007, I had mentioned that we had been using a trench around the site. In 2007, we kind of went a different route. We started saying we're going to do extraction around the toe of the landfill. So the extraction, there's a series of wells that go in, and they're pulling, they're able to pull groundwater out of multiple levels in the subsurface area. So at that point, there was NHDES issued the initial groundwater management permit. All right, next slide. I also mentioned for a while, so when they're extracting what's being extracted, it does end up in the Dover sewer system. So for a long time, there was no sewer in the area, and they were actually trucking the groundwater. So in around 2010, they expanded a force main from the site and constructed force main to gravity and connected into the Dover's municipal system. All right, next slide. Okay, so we'll talk about the main landfill area. So the extraction wells that I was just talking about, where they're pumping, are along the lower toe of the landfill. So they put them in. We've gotten about 260 million gallons of impacted water have been pumped out. And as I mentioned, the groundwater that is captured is going to the Dover wastewater treatment facility. All right, next slide. So from 2012 to 2017, we had 5 years where things seemed to be moving along as we had planned. So that groundwater extraction was working well. There was a fair amount of monitoring that was going on, and things seem to be really positive. Next slide. So then EPA did their first 5-year review, and this, I'm sure everyone remembers, around this time was when EPA started looking for PFAS and 1,4-dioxane. So we did do some analysis, you can see in the next slide, and that's when we start realizing that there are some concerns about the PFAS and the 1,4-D. All right, next slide. Looking to the eastern plume, we did a fair amount of investigation. No risk was identified, and so there's just a robust evaluation plan that continues every 5 years. It's ongoing evaluation. Next slide. So the southern plume, this is what you all are most interested in. We immediately started repumping that 4-inch pumping well that had been in place, and that was it was in place where the mass of what we understood the VOCs to be. This is when we started adding lines of monitoring wells closer to the Bellamy River, seeing that PFAS had traveled a bit farther than what the original VOCs had traveled. Next slide. So since 2020, so really it's not written here, but right away we had proposed, the Dover Landfill Group proposed expanding the well system that we had there. So we had the 1 4-inch well, and kind of a reactionary, or right away our proposal was to do more wells like that, do overland, because it is an all wetland area out there. It's really, you know, a nice environment out there. So we were hoping to do overland pumping, which limits the disruption of the wetland, but of course requires that it can't operate during the winter months. We proposed that. The agencies really did not feel comfortable with that. They wanted to do some additional monitoring. They wanted to really make sure that we understood what was needed, how the hydrology was performing before we put anything in place. So next slide. So where we are right now, we are still working with the agencies, still doing some additional monitoring. I'm showing the large watershed. So right now at the Bellamy intake, there are signs of PFAS, and we do know that there is PFAS low levels. They're low levels. And when we talk about, you know, I just was speaking to the Dover City Council, we do have a contaminated aquifer with PFAS. The levels are just orders of magnitude different, but there are low levels of PFAS found in the Bellamy. Right now, there's no detected 1,4-dioxane in the water intake, but we do have some detected in the tributary. Again, low levels, but we do know that it's there coming from the landfill. And monitoring at the landfill does show that everything's holding steady or decreasing at the shoreline. Next slide. So right now, we've been working with the agencies, and they have requested additional monitoring, hydraulic monitoring in the southern plume. So we are working with that with our consultants. We actually had a meeting with both EPA and DES today at the city of Dover, and then we went out to the site, talked through a lot of the modeling. The hope is in the summer we'll be installing additional monitoring wells. And then the next, once the models are in place, once EPA is comfortable with the models, we'll be able to move forward with our southern plume remediation design. And then EPA can approve it. And then we are still hopeful to be constructing in 2024. I think it's worth noting that we have some consistency both with our consultant and Dean Pichelle, who's been a representative. The EPA and DES both have had a fair amount of turnover, both with their project managers and the consultants that are working for them. So unfortunately, there's been a bit of catch up played. It just is a fact. And so there's been, you know, some of the questions and the requests for the additional modeling maybe comes because there wasn't that long history with the project. So I think that, you know, it wasn't that the models weren't done or that we were doing things without models, but they're just kind of looking for some additional information. Right, next slide. And I had mentioned that there was a 5-year review in 2022, and there were a handful of recommendations that came out of that review, which you know, some of you may be familiar with. So I wanted to just go through those really quickly, just to let you know that, you know, we can address all of them. So the first one just had to do with the technical memorandum on the Eastern Plume. There were reasons that hadn't been submitted because we were waiting on some additional information. So that we are definitely on target to submit that. They had requested by September of 2023, and that should be no problem. Slide. They are saying Dover Landfill Group to prepare 100% of the design report, remedial design report by, and again, the date is September 30, 2023. We did have a meeting with them today. Because of all the modeling and the pieces that need to fall into place, and just kind of the discussions between our technical support and their technical reviewers, we believe that we'll be able to have we're hoping both parties, the agencies and the Dover Landfill Group, are hoping to have a 30% by September 30, 2023. So it would not be 100% by that point. Next slide. Submit a work plan for further investigation. This had to do with that small area that we were talking about. And again, we did meet with them today. The work plan right now is for our for Verdantis to really go through all of the information that they already have, which is a lot and extensive, and outline some more information for them to review of why we believe that the capture zone is this hotspot area is covered by the capture that's in place. So next slide. And this one talks about, so see, I talked about that lower line of monitoring that's in place. The question that came up is they really want to have a good understanding of what the contaminant levels are going towards the Bellamy now that we can compare to in 10 years. And that discussion came out of today's, face-to-face talk about what they were looking for with this request. So while this looks like they are actually asking for a whole lot of additional wells or water wells, we agreed that that's probably not the best approach. So we're going to work with them to come up with a good idea to really understand what the contamination levels are, so that we can look at this again in the future. All right, next slide. This one is conduct additional investigation to complete delineation. So the question is, we know groundwater is going to the south and we know it's going to the east, and exactly where that line is difficult to tell. And it's also changes when you are pumping groundwater. It does start to merge. So we have a lot of historical data that really informs where we believe that line is. We'll need to continue to work on kind of pull that together to just really outline it to the agencies. And then we've agreed to put in a few, one or potentially more additional monitoring wells kind of between the two to just really clarify where that line is. All right, next slide. And then the last piece is the EPA just kind of made a comment saying they would like us to continue to monitor PFAS, which of course we definitely will. So we treat it as a contaminant of concern, and they will do that. Forward. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. And thank you again.
You mentioned the construction started 2024. How long does it take?
What do you think? What do you? Excuse me, when we put the storm control system in. It took about a year. We usually do all our construction in August, September, when it's really dry. Get in there, so, I would say, once we start construction, we put wells in, we would try to find in there 2 to 3 months in that construction season. And then the goal is to have a year-round system, so we would be starting, we would try to put it in that summer and start it up by 2024. And we can put in the extraction wells in easier. But once we start to put in infrastructure, but I think that's what we need to be really try to work on.
Yeah, it's very wet out there. That is a piece that we're working on.
So I mean, the short answer is one construction season. Two.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for coming down here. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate all for coming down here and this on this. This is obviously very important, being our drinking water as well as Dover's. When you mentioned the lower line that you were monitoring and EPA wanted to put like all these little testing spots in, what would be another way to do that to see, you know, what is there now compared to what's there in 10 years?
Sure. Well, so I think the comment maybe came before there was a real understanding of how many monitoring wells already exist. And it's good to have a lot of data, but it's also not great to poke a lot of holes into a layer right next to your reservoir. So there's certainly pros and cons. So using the information that is out there, I think is going to potentially be enough. You know, I don't know, were there other.
We talked about today about filling
Excuse
in the
me.
data. Yeah,
A little closer.
filling in the data gaps. Excuse me. That shoreline area is about 1,000-foot wide area, and we do have a set of the four shallow wells in that area. And there's 3 tributaries she mentioned. So we have a quarterly monitoring program. We're out there 4 times a year collecting data over time. So we feel like she said, we feel like we have a sufficient data set, but we'll be looking at it vertically and horizontally to see if there's any gaps that would help better understand. We talked about mass flux or how much contamination is potentially moving towards it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a different question, I guess, and that is, isn't PFAS still used in manufacturing?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
And you know, it seems like we're going to be fighting this forever.
That's right. That is right. And you know, it's one of those things. Dover and the Dover Landfill Group are both 100% committed to fixing this. But we also have got to stop it from coming into, you know, so that is, you know, it's John Storrs, Brian, who are really kind of at the forefront of those discussions, but absolutely. And that, you know, at what point you can really do a lot, but to what end? I mean, just stop getting it out there. Yeah. And Dover, similar, I think, to Portsmouth has been, we have students from UNH who are doing some work. It's a, you know, capstone project, but they're analyzing water levels just throughout the city, you know, even rain levels, and you know, PFAS is everywhere. Yeah, so it's a bigger problem than one site.
I would add, I know there wasn't data provided. I looked real quick on you know, the slide I provided, and Al summarizes what we are seeing at the intake is 3 parts per trillion PFOA. The other compounds on the 4-quarter average are non-detect, pretty much, or you know, a blip of a quadrillion of something or whatever. So again, like Gretchen said, you know, we're looking, one of the recommendations we have is like look upstream a little bit too, so you have that comparative there. And then initially when we were notified, I think it was Dean at the time, a few years back, about the 1,4-dioxane, the first thing we agreed to as a group was sampling at our intake. So that happens, when Christine, you said do quarterly, they've been doing quarterly at our intake, which will continue probably indefinitely. It's real important as well, because we know it's there, but again, this, how much is attenuating and actually maybe getting to our intake is still a question.
Yeah, thank you again for coming out and for the presentation. I have a few different questions. So one is the Dover landfill group and the city, like how does the Dover landfill group and the city of Dover work together? Or is there representatives from the city of Dover on that group? Or can you just describe that structure a little
Yeah,
bit more?
no, that's a really good question. So I am the representative from Dover on the Dover landfill group. And I obviously work really closely with John and our city manager, but so that's my role. So Dean is the project manager, so he represents the Dover landfill group. And so when EPA is reaching out correspondence about the project, it goes through him and then it comes to all of the members. The two larger contributors obviously just pay more attention, and I mean, it's part of my job really to pay a lot of attention. One, because Dover is obviously part of it. Two, because it's in our city, it's leading to our drinking water, it's going to our wastewater treatment facility. So there's just a lot of stake in that group. So I'm here talking tonight. It really maybe should just be the Dover landfill group, but we're neighbors, so we're here. But that's how that works.
So ultimately, is it the Dover landfill group who's responsible for this? But because Dover is such a big part of that group or has a large percentage, that's okay.
And because we're neighbors, we're just,
Yeah.
that's.
Can you tell us what was put in the landfill? Like, I'm curious what the source of the PFAS, I mean, I know PFAS are ubiquitous, but I recall, and we didn't talk much about levels other than like what's in the reservoir, but some of the plumes have pretty high levels of PFAS, right? Like I'm just recalling like a newspaper article from a few years ago, like 800, 900 parts per trillion of PFAS.
Yeah, that's about that one order of magnitude of that, about 800. That's where the two highest values were for people and costs.
And that's the southern plume?
No, that's up in the one. That's
Oh,
like,
that's-
that's source concentrations. And then near the shoreline, we do have the single digits.
Okay.
Very, very low, similar to what's, everywhere else.
So what, do you know historically what was put in the landfill that might contribute to levels that high? I mean,
Everything. I know, but it's a municipal landfill, so domestic waste, so just household waste, and certainly it started in the east side near Toland Road, and over time got filled to the west. So in the 70s, industrial users started depositing more, say, on the west side toward the end of the life of the landfill. So that's where, when we were doing our testing, the east side has attenuated very well. I mean, the west side has too, it's degraded quite a bit, and the northwest landfill where took out more mass. So the landfill itself is, has attenuated since the 1980s.
but PFAS won't attenuate.
No, but it does, but it still follows an attenuation pattern where you have sort concentrations that maybe 1,000, they go to 100 to 10 to single digits. There's a pattern, it's a pattern of attenuation for both 1,4-dioxane and for PFAS. That's stable.
And I just wanted to be clear, it never did get capped, right? There was talk of it and then that stopped. Okay, I thought so, but I don't know. What treatment technology are you using to treat the groundwater? You talked about the system that was in place to like what is that?
I mean, it's POTW. I mean, it's when it's leaving the landfill, it's non-hazardous water because of the levels in it. And it's really VOCs that, again, it's all relative at fairly low levels. And we're coming into the top of the sewer system. So it's kind of traveling all through the sewer system to the POTW. So the treatment is really settling, and any treatment that would happen at the POTW. I mean, on the landfill, all we're doing is settling solids out. the waters and not.
The wastewater facility.
Yeah, the
No,
wastewater treatment,
right.
that's
What did I
exactly.
say?
DOT, right?
Well,
Well, an acronym, we're all.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to read my horrible handwriting. So plume remediation design, like what technology would you, is it similar technology or would it be carbon as in? and-
Well, ground extraction. I mean, that's the remediation, is getting the water out of the ground and
And
then
then doing what with it?
sending it to the wastewater treatment facility.
So it wouldn't be treating the water, it would just be pulling it out?
Right. I mean, it's treated at whatever treatment occurs at the wastewater treatment.
But it is not going through any sort of carbon at the wastewater treatment facility. It's similar to, unfortunately, there is PFAS in regardless of the landfill that is coming through. Right, I know Portsmouth's dealing with it too. Right now, Dover sludge is, we're taking it to Canada. That is a problem, and that is a different problem, but how that gets managed at the wastewater treatment facility is something that we are continuing to work on too.
Okay,
Getting
so
rid of the sludge.
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
That must be awful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's, these stories keep going too. People really not that long ago, sludge was being used for farming and for agriculture. And then obviously that's not happening right now. So that is definitely a hot topic.
and then my last question would be, how could all of this change as we talked about the EPA is going to issue MCLs? I know that's for drinking water. And this is related to the drinking water at the Bellevue Reservoir, but it's also, part of the landfill. So what could we expect might change if MCLs come down really low and now the Bellevue might, even 3 parts per trillion for PFOA, but potentially we don't know, could exceed an MCL depending on, we know right now the health advisory is in the part per quadrillion, so that's below. So anyways, I'm just curious how could your plans change or how could you address this should those MCLs come in very low and exceed what we see coming into the Bellevue Reservoir?
I will ask Christine to chime in, but I will say that the commitment is to keep the contaminants, PFAS, from getting, to Bellevue. And that's what we're doing. So I can't really see, nothing's going to be expanded more, right? We're going to get as much as we can now. And then I'll let Christine talk.
I mean, yeah, the groundwater extraction is the technology, and the total of the landfill we've been pumping since 2012, the 260 million gallons. So we're intercepting the water that's coming from the landfill. You can never intercept 100% of water molecules, but you're getting a lot of that higher mass. And we've seen those concentrations have the total of the landfill decrease. So we already started an interception in 2012 that wraps around the southern edges of the landfill. And when that's doing a robust job, we're seeing changes and decrease in concentrations. With the southern plume, we'll put another layer, like another line of defense of interception. So even though the source control is working and starting to flow things down as they come south, even in 2012, there was already mass south of the landfill, right? So we want to try to go a little further south, intercept that, pump it away. So we keep all these systems pumping for a long time. It gradually reduces all the groundwater concentrations around. But it's a long-term commitment. And there is, again, these are forever chemicals. So there is attenuation, but it's in the form of dilution and just normal mixing of water, as it's moving through the subsurface. So just dispersion and diffusion.
Thanks. Yeah, I still, I don't know, to pump out the water but not treat it doesn't seem great. I'm not an engineer, but if there's an opportunity, I know at Pease we have the gap in the resin that they take out of they treat it and then they re-inject the clean water back into the aquifer. you know, that is the challenge of PFAS. It's not just specific to this situation or anywhere else. Like, we don't really have a way to get rid of it. We just move it around, which doesn't feel great. And we just take pollution from one place and move it somewhere else, and it becomes somebody else's problem, which is not sustainable. I think that's it. I had a lot of questions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Anybody else has any follow-up questions, or maybe Laurel? She has.
A lot of questions have already been asked. I was curious, did you say that the sludge from the wastewater treatment plant goes to Canada?
It does, yeah, right? I mean, that's still the plan, yeah. Would not agree, not a great solution.
I have a question about that. That just, yeah.
I don't want to speak, that I don't know all the details. I believe it goes to a place called Asbestos Canada, so I don't think that's it's not a desirable location. But that is a whole nother topic.
Got it. No, thanks for your presentation. The questions I was going to ask were answered. Maybe just one thing to clarify in terms of the water that you're pumping out from that area. Is that what has hundreds of parts per trillion of PFAS, or was that something else?
That is it's the source area water, so the water from the toe of the landfill, the highest concentrations. I don't know the exact concentration because it's a mixture, and the concentrations that she had cited were for individual monitoring wells at a point location. So the effluent is a combined effluent.
Christine, the toe is what, the northeast?
It's southern toe, the southern, it looks like the W at the bottom, so you've got that. The main landfill area, when we say the toe of the landfill, it's the kind of along the southern side of that main landfill, so yeah. Right, any of those, you see the W, that's your toe. Right there, see that?
Yeah,
So it's going towards the toe of the arrows are the groundwater flow.
so, and maybe you didn't get into this too much, but that's a trench, correct?
There's no
trench, right?
perimeter ditch.
Okay.
It wasn't, she was mentioning the trench, which is an air sparge trench, which was a remedial technology, which would have been more like a 30 or 40-foot trench around the perimeter, blowing air up through it. That was not going to be feasible to implement at the, because it's so much clay up there. So that's why the pump and treat, the trench got switched to a pump and treat.
Okay, but so that does not, that's not coming towards the southern flow. That's what gets either pumped out or it's going towards.
Yeah, the landfill storage areas get
Okay.
pumped out
All
and intercepted, sent out.
One more questions. Are there any private wells in the area that have been affected?
Well, along Toland Road, all the wells along Toland Road, they pulled in public water along Toland Road. So I don't know historically, I think they had low levels of VOCs and some of the shallow wells near the, between the landfill and the Cachico River.
The data, all the data that you all collect, do you have a place, is that available online?
Yes,
for the community to review?
So the New Hampshire DES One Stop, if you look up the landfill, we do an annual report every year. And we actually do quarterly updates. And the quarterly updates are now including the PFAS and the reporting data. So every year we have a summary.
And then my last question is the groundwater extraction system that you have. I'm not familiar with like what that looks like, but is it something that in the future additional technology could be added to? Like, like we have the gap in the resident piece, that's what I'm familiar with. So is there, is there like a treatment plan or something? I don't know what it looks like, so.
Right, so we're pumping the water, just big, larger diameter wells that just pump the water up to the surface, collects into a sedimentation tank at the landfill, and then it gets pumped off to the wastewater treatment facility. At any point, we could add treatment. The biggest issue with water in this area is rich in iron. So as much as you're trying to treat, you know, part per trillion level of something, you have to remove mass amounts of iron. So it's,
We've seen that at Peace.
yeah, so it's just a complicating factor, so and while the water meets criteria for the wastewater treatment facility, we will continue to send there, but that's an ongoing discussion with the city and the EPA as to what in the future might happen.
Okay.
Just to add on to that, the point that was raised earlier is that there are places that are contributing PFAS that really should not be. This one is unfortunately, you know, dealing with a previous issue. I know DES is talking a lot about wastewater treatment facilities looking upstream at what's contributing, and I think when that continues to progress, some of the new the byproducts of, you know, a new PFAS introduction is really where we want to focus a lot of our energy and taking that out of the stream.
It's been a long time since I've taken chemistry. But is it an organic, is PFAS an organic or an inorganic?
That I don't know. The Al maybe know more than I do.
It is an
It's
organic.
the organic compost that's been produced, but it has carbon being used.
It might be hard to answer this, but are Dover residents interested in all of this? Do you get a lot of interest?
Yeah, we did. I mean, I mentioned that we gave a presentation recently. Certainly the counselors are interested, and there was some turnout for folks that lived around there. This has been a long history, right? So for a long time, there was a group that is heavily involved. And that has sort of dissipated over the years. So there's
Is that what kind of started a citizen action group, so to speak, or was it more of
no, what started it was it becoming the Superfund site.
Sure, but I wasn't sure if a lot of citizens were, you know, complaining about it, and that's what led to it initially, but.
The other way around. And then we also have what we call the Dover Utilities Committee, which is kind of similar to what this group is, not just focused on drinking water. And then we do, you know, a lot of the discussion with that kind of similar water sources. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And then obviously I would say, you know, any questions, Brian and Al talk all the time. Al and I think maybe are gonna try and get some more property, so more you can add to your list. So definitely reach out to them and answers.
Great, thank
All
you, thank you. Okay,
Brian, I have a few questions from some of the earlier stuff, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And Dover folks, feel free to leave, you don't have to stay for it. Around the land acquisition, what will be done with that land? Nothing?
Conservation, it's actually a conservation easement purchase, so we're protecting the land being developed. What's happening with that? For that, nothing will happen. So the property owner will still own the property and there will be like the forestry, when it's done, we approve the forestry plan. But anything that could potentially impact water quality of the reservoir.
Okay. Good. Question about Collinswell too. I know the Collinswell doesn't contribute a huge amount to the water supply, it's pretty small. I don't know if that's because it's just a small well, or once well 2 is online, would we expect to see it like contribute more to the source?
The overall Collinswell field, now we're calling sort of Collinswell field, we're trying to have permitted for 450 gallons a minute, which historically that field could do. Limitations are the old Collinswell is it's getting clogged with manganese. The screen is old and it's getting clogged. We can only clean it out so much. We're in a cycle now of every 2 years, I think, of cleaning it, but it clogs back up again. So it can contribute 250 gallons a minute, 300 if you really push it. But that's it. So with this other well, it's gonna enable us to get up to that 450 gallons.
Okay, so it will add more to the system once it's fully functioning. And will manganese be a problem there or,
It may be over time.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of maintaining both of these wells to keep it going.
and both wells will stay in place?
Yes.
Collins well and
That is the
Collins.
plan.
I have a question about the system interconnection, like when that all happens. Who will oversee that? It won't become like one big system, right? Is the plan for that interconnection just to help in emergencies? and
Yes,
It's
that's
like, so,
typically it,
Okay.
emergency, intermunicipal. Cooperation, so that we're gonna work on agreements that we sort of laid out.
Mhm.
You know, when the initial in 2014, when the initial PFAS hit happened at the Hayden well and it was shut down, we actually got water from Rye for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And you know, we're interconnected with them, so we could pump water the other way as well. No, it's not intended to make one big system. It's just, you know, you have a fire, water main break, brief contamination, that kind of thing. So the idea is to be able to, you know, maybe a few days, a week, but not, you know, continuous.
and then so who would be responsible for the pipes that, you know, like interconnect all the
Well,
systems?
the
and
bridge, we've talked about this. I believe the bridge itself, in the middle is where Dover starts. I don't know, who responds to the accident? Of course, it's Newington, it's not even Portsmouth, so, right down the middle, so we figure, you know, we'd be responsible for all our pipe. And we need pumps on the Newington side in order to get water over to Dover. They have higher pressure, so it'd strictly be opening a valve and have a valve control the flow that would come this way. You know, it'd be shared responsibility, we'd have agreement. Be any issues there.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any last minute questions? All right, I think we just need to, Laurel, go right ahead, sorry.
It's okay. I just had a quick question for David. I was interested in thanks for the legislative update. I was curious for the bill that you mentioned about requiring health insurance providers to cover preventative health care related to PFAS. Are there any other states that are doing that, or do you have a model for what that legislation would look like? Because that, to me, I hadn't heard of a state offering that, so I was curious to hear more about it.
I don't know a lot about the particulars of that bill, and I do know that the state rep who filed it has had significant health issues that she traces back to her high level of exposure to Gen X over in Merrimack. And her entire family has extremely highly elevated levels. People in her neighborhood do. It's just a long-term issue, and one of the things that we're asking people to do, you know, in effect, is to, you know, to monitor a chemical in their blood that basically can't be removed, where the levels never, you know, aren't going to go down any. And one of the things that we really, you know, don't have a great understanding of at this point is what is the long-term impact of even a small level of exposure to these chemicals. So I think, you know, when you look at the way we monitor other health conditions, the way we monitor, you know, if you have a history of cardiac disease in your family, if you have a history of diabetes, I think one of the things that I think she's looking for is a little bit more parity in the healthcare system than what we have now, which isn't much. The testing itself, even the cost of monitoring it, is expensive because you have the expense of the testing, you know, unless you're able to take advantage of something like the PEAS testing program, you know, and get your levels that way. But in terms of, you know, even being able to monitor your levels on a year-by-year basis, just to kind of know where you are, you're accumulating more of it, where do you stand now? just continually having that testing done. My understanding is it's not that easy to get it, number one, and it's expensive. And a lot of insurance companies, they don't look at it as a preventive cost. Preventive costs are, preventive expenses actually covered under the a lot of the healthcare changes that were implemented back in 2010, but diagnostic services are not included in that. And so even though you're monitoring it, it effectively is considered a diagnostic service when you get the test. So if you have something like a high deductible health plan, you could find yourself, you know, if the test costs $700, that's $700 against your deductible. And that's just for testing. So I think what I'm not quite sure where that bill stands at this point, but I know a lot of people are interested in what she's doing. And to answer your question, I don't know if that's an approach they've taken in other states. This is one of the areas where New Hampshire is actually in a lot of ways leading the way. You know, we were one of the leaders in establishing state level MCLs. And I think a lot of the stuff that we do at the state level, you know, obviously we can't have as much impact as the federal government could if it actually decided to start doing things. But there are things that we can do, and I think you know, there are a lot of other states that actually have their eyes on the stuff that we do in our legislature when it comes to PFAS, and I think this is an issue that other states will be looking at too. And what I would expect is that bills like this usually continue to get better. You learn things in the public hearings that you didn't know when you were writing the bill or you were putting the legislation together. And every time you go through this process, I know it seems sometimes with some of these bills, it's like Groundhog Day, but every year these bills get a little bit better. The people who are putting them forward are more knowledgeable. They're able to pull in people who can do more. And one of the things we find in New Hampshire is that this is not like a short-term game, a short-term fight where we can expect to have a lot of really cool victories in one section of the legislature. It's really kind of a thing of building momentum, having good learning experiences, talking to people who know stuff, you know, like people in this group is really important. And we kind of go on from there, but that's how we've been making progress.
So with respect to the insurance covering the blood testing, I know a few years ago, New Hampshire passed a law that said that insurance needs to cover it. And though I didn't wish it upon me, I drank the water at Pease before I got into this job. So I participated in the first 2 rounds of blood testing. And then when I found out that, you know, it gets paid for, I went, you know, my annual physical, I said to my doctor, I want a PFAS test. Of course, first thing he says, what's that? And then he looked it up. Couldn't find anywhere to do it. So it's been a year. And then, but last October, I was able, he had the test through Quest. So he was able to order it up and got the test. So, you know, it's a whole other aspect of my deal with this, but interesting enough, the blood results over that time, I know the word attenuation was brought up as far as, you know, things dissipate, they go down over time. With PFAS, they talk about half-lives. So how long does it take for half of this to get out of your body? My blood is tracking almost lockstep with those predictions or that analysis, what other people are doing. So, I mean, I'm more than happy to share that because I think that's enlightening. That to me, it's like, well, you know, I'm still drinking water. Still has some PFAS, but you know, my numbers aren't continuing to go up. They're down. They're doing what is, you know, and I have my ailments, but you know, I can attribute that to my gray hair and Just regular old man syndrome.
If you have an understanding of the levels of exposure, you know, what kind of chemicals are actually in your system at what level. At some point, we may actually have a much better understanding of what your level of risk may be for different, you know, for different conditions. So the doctor can say, well, gee, because you have this particular compound in your system at this level, you might be more at risk for this type of cancer. So what we'll do is we'll run a test, a preventive test for that kind of thing. So I think that's the point I think that that we would like to get to.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, the medical side is in that research, I'm only peripherally familiar with, but I do know that some of the concerns about the low levels of PFAS, and Laurel can speak to this more than I for sure, are, you know, vaccines and tetanus shots and things like that. And it's like, well, you know, if the tetanus shot is every 10 years, then maybe you should give it every 7 or something. I mean, to me, that it's like, okay, well, Brian, get a tetanus shot in, you know, 7 years instead of 10. I mean, okay, fine, I'll do that. That's a go visit the doctor. Boom.
Yeah, I think the concern sometimes too is that people don't even mount the appropriate response though with vaccine. But more studies are being done, such as PFAS REACH. But one other point I just wanted to make, the National Academy of Science did come out with some guidance last summer. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it talks about screening levels in your blood. First of all, they recommend people who are highly exposed get blood tested for PFAS, which was like a big milestone. And then they listed like levels in your blood and what risks you're at, and then a list of medical monitoring criteria. So I hope that Wendy Thomas's bill is kind of based off that National Academy of Science. Like, to me, it's like there's already like a model in place, and maybe it is. I'm not. Yeah. So there's already a roadmap, you know. So it's just getting the insurances to.
So we fortunately we got Andrea and Merrimack. They have water warriors and the Kathy Stack, Wendy Thomas, and Nancy Murphy, and they are free women, forces of nature that not only have been big advocates for their community, but actually got elected to the legislature to actually pass stuff and big changes. So pretty neat story and a pretty dedicated group of women.
Yeah, and I'll just add, in addition to the National Academy's report, our PFAS REACH group also developed medical screening guidance documents. Andrea was part of that process too. Kind of getting at what Brian was saying, you know, if you do know you had elevated levels of exposure, what are some tests that your doctors might consider running is, you know, part of your long-term health care, just things to keep an eye on. So I guess the next step is to see what ATSDR does with the National Academy's recommendations in terms of what they come up with for guidance, because I think that's where doctors go for guidance, is to ATSDR and to CDC. So I'm hoping that they will follow the National Academy's recommendations and offer some kind of concrete recommendations to.
All right. Public comments?
We do have one attendee, and I'd say Rosalie, if you have a question, you can type it into the chat. Okay. And I see a hand raised, so. Okay.
We can conclude our meeting then.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
So.
Thank you all.
One last thing, I guess, Andrea, we've talked, it's going to be Tuesday or Wednesday. That was the, you know, kind of so what we generally do, Andrea and I get together post meeting and discuss, and we work on the meeting minutes. Right now, I just penciled in, it looks like sometime in June, we'll look to have our next meeting. So always between then and now, you know, feel free to comment, suggest topics and stuff, and we'll certainly start working on a date. A lot of that plays into what city council and other meetings are going on here, and then we'll schedule something and look to June.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Happy spring.
So.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.